No. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to the European Parliament. I guess most of you were there at the Beyond Growth conference, right? Can I assume this? You remember the level of energy in the plenary at the final plenary that we had, and I'd like to start this follow-up event. Well, recognizing that 6 months on, we are suffering some blows. I mean, no one can say that the European Green Deal is the beginning of, is the transition to a Beyond Growth European Union, but it could become it. But actually, instead of making further inroads, it's now the target of, I would say, fairly violent counteroffensive by the far right and the right, but also helped, to be honest, by more traditional political forces. I am fighting at the moment the battle around European fiscal rules. You might say, well, it has nothing to do with our topic. Well, it has a lot to do with our topic. Basically, the question is, are we going to let, how should I call it, fiscal Talibanism take over again? And it's not an exaggeration, actually, because, well, Talibans are people who put their religious faith above reality, and reality should conform their religious faith. When I'm looking at the likes of Christian Lindner, the German finance minister, I see quite a lot of convergence there. His religious obsession about reducing the size of the state and public spending and public debt reminds me of those deniers of reality. And it's not pleasant to witness at first quarters the capitulation of possibly a majority of this parliament under this religious obsession, and that includes indeed social democrats. It's interesting when I say, these new fiscal rules that oblige a reduction, an annual reduction in the stock of public debt, I mean the debt to GDP ratio, they say, no, don't worry about this. We will be able to still invest while reducing the debt if only we have growth. Yeah, okay, guys. So they've understood everything. So that is a bit the context we're in. So the question that we want to ask tonight is how we move on, how we move forward in order to influence the agenda of the next European Commission, Parliament and Council after the European election. And yes, we have massive headwinds, but what I won't accept is that, like some social democrats that I know, I don't accept that it's a given that those forces will win. Because basically, if we stop fighting, yes, they will win. But maybe what we do between now and June 2024 will make a difference. Remember, and again, I hate to quote the Spanish situation, but a few months ago, it was taken as a given that a far-right coalition would rule Spain now. It's not the case, because indeed a campaign was fought. Now, I must also say that it's the Spanish finance minister, a social democrat, but having become a neoliberal, Nadia Calviño, is precisely driving those bad deals around European fiscal rules. So again, what we want is the people minded towards human dignity to win, but I see that there's still a majority of people thinking that profits actually will give human dignity, carrying the day at the moment. But we are not going to give up anytime soon. So this is my introduction, maybe a bit subdued compared to my conclusion 6 months ago, but that's the reality of the fight we have to fight. And so I keep saying that you only change reality if you look at it like it is. That doesn't mean that you want to keep it like it is, But, well, let's look at the situation like it is. And I will give the floor to Éloi Laurent. Éloi has been quite active together with François Denis on my team to try to devise how to move forward. Because, indeed, if we want, our target should be actually that in the next political term, we move from a Green Deal to a European Green and Social Deal beyond growth. That's what we want. And so how do we shape that up? Really integrating the notions of planetary boundaries and human dignity for all. That is what we really want to achieve. So without further ado, I'll give Éloi the floor for 20 minutes. Then we will have 3 discussions next to me, and then Agatha Meissner will, after a few exchanges, will give her more than 2 cents of wisdom on this. Agatha, don't forget your conclusions in May, and these were quite energetic, and I expect no less today. But Éloi, first you.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe. Can you hear me well?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Very honored to be here. I have to say I was a bit worried hearing your speech at the end of the Beyond Growth conference, Philippe. You were sounding really optimistic, and I'm really happy, and I'm really relieved that you are again, with the deep pessimism. So it's really nice to hear that. So I'm really happy to be participating in this event. So what I'm trying to present here is, so first of all, thank you very much, Philippe. Thank you, François and Léa, for organizing this. What I'm going to present is essentially a first draft of a paper that was commissioned by the Beyond Growth organizers, the Beyond Growth Conference organizers, that we have been writing together with Yamina Saeb and Julia Steinberger on the question of how to embed the visions, some of the visions that were presented at the Beyond Growth Conference into European institutions. In my talk in May, in this fabulous conference, I dared to say that for me the conference was a turning point in the battle of ideas, but it also marked the beginning of the battle for institutions. And I think that if Beyond Growth are to be to become reality and change European lives and lives globally for the best, they have to be embedded in European institutions. And so our effort is to try to understand how we can move from the current situation of the Green Deal into a social and Green Deal, and starting with the lives of Europeans. So this is what I'm going to present tonight. So next slide, please. I'm sorry, this will be really old school. I'm going to say next slide all the time. So first, let's start with the political context. So Philippe has given one aspect of the context, which is, I think, and I will come back to that, the question of austerity versus sufficiency. But that's I will come to that in a minute, but let's really start with the political discourse that we are being fed right now in the EU, which is that an anti-ecological populism, what I would call an anti-ecological populism, is really making headlines, and we are told 2 things. The first thing, and it comes from the far right and hardcore conservatives, the first thing we are being told is that Europeans don't care that much about environmental issues, and perhaps even not so much about social issues. What they really care about is identity politics, immigration, Islam, identity, and this is really what they want to hear in this election. Well, guess what? If you have seen, like me, the Eurobarometer that was published yesterday, which is, basically taking the political pulse of Europeans 6 months before the elections, what you see is that the first 3 priorities of Europeans is really the fight against poverty and social exclusion, public health, and actions against climate change. And if you look at France and, polls that have been done in France, why France? Because France is told to be the next European big country which is going to fall in the far right camp, you see exactly the same thing, which is that actually identity, immigration, and Islam really take a backseat to social issue, environmental issues. So I'm really not convinced that Europeans are that much obsessed with identity politics. So the first narrative for me is not convincing. This narrative, the first narrative of anti-ecological populism, which is don't do anything about the environment or even social issues, really focus on identity politics. And the second part of this narrative is to say that, well, maybe, people care about social issues, but they think that they are completely and inextricably in opposition to environmental issues. So you have a sort of inextricable conflict between social and environmental issues, and this was really clear with the Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vest crisis in 2018, 2019. This is really the first revolt of, people against environmental policy, and we have seen that in the Netherlands and in Germany in different forms and in the UK. And so, well, this is the reality. There is a conflict between environmental policy and social issues, and you cannot basically do anything to alleviate that. And again, it's really not convincing. If you look at studies that have been published on the Gilets jaunes motivations and their beliefs, you very clearly see that they were absolutely not climate skeptics, and that they actually believe more than the general French population that climate change, mitigation of climate change should be a priority. And so I think what you see here is that the narrative, which is that on the one hand it's okay to deny environmental emergency, and on the other hand it's okay to weaponize social emergency against environmental emergency, is not a good enough answer to what Europeans actually want and think. So what we need to do is to try to articulate social and environmental emergency. Okay, and that was, of course, a key theme in the Beyond Growth conference. So next slide, please. So the starting point of the policy brief that we are writing with Yamina and Julia is really to start with this idea that we need those beyond growth visions, but they need to be embedded in European institutions. And European institutions today is really the Green Deal. So if we want to make progress with beyond growth at the EU level, we need to have a change within the Green Deal rather than just to say we need a tabula rasa and do away with the Green Deal and invent something else. We need to start with what already exists, and as you know better than me, the Green Deal has made really significant progress in 2022. And so I think it should be the starting point. And then the question is, what do we need to do in this sort of second cycle of the Green Deal that will start in June 2024? Okay, the first cycle is now completed, and the new cycle is going to open up. And the European Commission, via the voice of Ursula von der Leyen, said in the State of the Union address that we need to industrialize the Green Deal, the way that the Biden administration has, put forward the IRA. And so we need to have a sort of European version of the IRA. And this is going to be the next step for the Green Deal. And we think, on the other hand, that we need to socialize the Green Deal, not industrialize the Green Deal, because there are, of course, some concerns about environmental policy. No one is denying that there are some concerns. But what I really want to stress is that the two main issues today in the EU are fuel poverty and food insecurity. These issues don't come from the ecological transition. They come from the non-transition. There was a report that was really famous in European history about the cost of non-Europe. And what we are witnessing today in the EU is the cost of non-transition. Non-transition of food systems, energy systems, mobility, etc., in the last 3 decades has come at the cost of huge health inequities, food insecurity, and fuel poverty. And this is what we are witnessing today. And yet, yes, we need to build social-ecological policy that address both emergencies, but really understand that it's not the fantasy of future inequality stemming from an hypothetical ecological transition that's the problem today in the EU. It's the cost of non-transition. The inequality, social inequality today results from the non-transition. Okay, so we need a transition, but we need a social ecological transition. So this is really the starting point of the paper, and this is really the framework in which we are trying to build our reflection. So next slide, please. So maybe one thing which is original in the paper is that we don't start from grandiose visions of new indicators. We try to start with the lives of Europeans, and we try to build profiles of Europeans that are caught in what we call the social-ecological predicaments. That is, they are facing the double penalty of social inequality and environmental inequality, and I think is going to be more and more the case in the future. And so what we try to do in the paper is really have some, profiles of Europeans and explain what they are facing today. So for instance, Marie in France, a single mother who is worried about the health of her children, living under the double penalty of food insecurity and fuel poverty. You might think that France is a really rich country and that we actually don't face a lot of fuel poverty and food insecurity. Right now, we are probably talking about 8 to 9 million people in France that are facing this kind of situation. And so this is really the emergency of the time. And these are, by the way, environmental issues, of course. Food and energy, all right? But you also have other kind of profiles. So, for instance, Agueda in Portugal worried about the impact of heat waves and wildfires for health and home, because millions of Europeans are facing a direct threat to their health and to what they possess because of the accelerating climate crisis. And as you know, the climate crisis is going faster in Europe than it is in the rest of the world. So if we are thinking that right now we are witnessing a really concerning acceleration of the climate crisis, it goes even faster in Europe. So next slide, please. We have other profiles in our paper trying to, again, start with the daily lives of people and show that the current situation of non-transition is basically destroying jobs, health, homes, etc. And so then what we do, next slide please, is we try to build what we call a social-ecological matrix. And I have to say that this was inspired by the remarkable report that came out from the Belgian government, from the High Committee on Just Transition, in which there is an effort to try to bring together social and environmental policies and build a sort of articulation between the two in a social-ecological matrix. What we do, which is a bit more innovative here, is that we embed this social-ecological matrix into, on the one hand, well-being dimensions, and on the other hand, European profiles, so that actually we are trying to see where we can make a difference in terms of social and environmental policies and mixing the two in the lives of the Europeans that we have tried to identify. So next slide, please. So this is the social-ecological matrix. So what you see here is on the top, you see well-being dimensions, so the essential components of well-being, which are, I think, identified in the literature, okay, whether it would be subsistence, security, participation, stability. And then the red is obviously the social policies, and then the green is the environmental policies. And then you have different boxes of the matrix where the two come together in defining social-ecological policies, and we have put the names of the people whose lives we want to improve by doing this, which is using, very advanced social and environmental policies that we have in the EU to actually make a difference. So it can be in terms of, using social ecological taxation, redistribution to actually allow people to equip for the ecological transition and avoid the huge cost of having to do home renovation, energy, equipment changes by yourself. But it can also be, thinking about social ecological protection against the ecological shocks that are accelerating in the EU. So this is one thing that we do. Okay, so next slide, please. And then we we really try to put this effort into this metamorphosis of the Green Deal into a social and Green Deal. So the Green Deal as it is represented on this table, all right? So you have the 4 pillars: climate and energy, resource and pollution, food and agriculture, biodiversity and ecosystems. You have the 4 goals, which is climate neutrality, materials efficiency, food sovereignty, and natural conservation. And you have some indicators stemming from all the legislative acts that were passed in 2022, especially in 2022, okay? And this is the Green Deal. And you can say, well, the goal is to just achieve that. What we want to do in the paper, next slide, please, is to get from that to actually, so next slide, please, this, which is the social and Green Deal. And so we don't want, of course, to do away with the Green Deal. That would be completely absurd. We want to build on what has already been achieved and add a social component. So think about climate neutrality. To become, the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050 is really abstract for the lives of people. So we want to have climate neutrality, but also equity. And by equity, we mean that there is an international dimension of justice, but also a dimension within the EU. That is, yes, we want to cut emission by, at least 55%, but we also want, or we should want, to cut fuel poverty by as much, let's say 50%, even more, by actually a closer horizon. And so we do that for all the different pillars and all the 4 goals of the Green Deal. And so it leads us to think in terms not of just climate neutrality, but climate neutrality and equity, material efficiency and sufficiency. And this is where I completely agree with Philippe, of course, that we are having a debate on austerity. The real debate that we should be having is on sufficiency. And austerity and sufficiency lead to completely different policies in fiscal terms. And yes, I'm aware that tomorrow is going to be a next step in trying to invent, let's say, in diplomatic language, this is the language of the European Commission, less stupid fiscal rules. This was the language of Romano Prodi. But I think we need to have really a reflection that goes even further than that and think about this goal of sufficiency. And then food sovereignty and security and conservation and regeneration. And so then this, of course, is going to then define different goals for the social and Green Deal. And this is what we want to work towards to the next election, so that when we have a new parliament, then we will have new priorities. I'm going to end. I see you, Philippe, and I know that my time is up.
Well, no, you're not yet. I just wanted to say that you have 5 minutes to go.
Oh, really? Well, that's a gift. Thank you very much. So then I will use those 5 minutes for the last slide, because, so next slide, please. So this slide, of course, is a very important one, which is how we get to here, from here to there, and what are the transformation pathways. So what I showed you is a reflection on Europeans and their lives, and I think their lives are very much concerned today with social and environmental issues. And so I think one thing that we might be pushing in the final version of the paper is really to have a new institution in the EU. My surprise was to realize that there were no permanent EU citizens forum among the many, many European institutions that we have. And I think that you might deride those forums as gadgets, but if you know anything about the crisis of democracy, you know that it is serious and that democracy needs to have new blood. And one option is to have those open democracy methods. And one of the goals of this new panel forum would be precisely to debate on those social-ecological issues on a regular basis. So imagine that we are having right now an EU Citizens Forum debating on energy and food. That would be, I think, a very important addition to the kind of debates that we are having in EU institutions. So we want to have this sort of permanent EU Citizens Forum, in a sense, representing the ideal types of Europeans that we are outlining in the paper, but we want to have those real people actually debate together, because it's not just the isolated situation which is interesting, but also the dialogue that they might be having on the kind of policies that they might accept to improve their lives. Then, of course, we need to have a new governance to put, the Green Deal on the industrial ground, of course, is important, but I think there is a very important synergy to invent between a competence which is mostly European on environmental and industrial matters and social competences, which are really national. And if we think that we need to have this, fruitful crossing between social and environmental dimensions, we need to invent an articulation between those different competences. We also need to have trade unions front and center on this debate. It's the debate on just transition, but it's even broader than that. It's the social-ecological transition debate. And we need to invent new partnerships between EU institutions, national governments, and trade unions to have those issues debated. As you know, maybe French trade unions are really now up to speed on environmental crisis, and I think and I know that it's the case at the European level, but it's not embedded as it should in EU institutions. And finally, there's the question of financing, and here also the social finance and the Green Deal has two problems. The first one is it's really limited, and the second one is in the form of compensating for the effect of environmental policies. And so I think there are other ways to do that. Amounts should be much more significant, but also the method should really be social-ecological in the sense of, for instance, using those historically high fossil fuels to actually finance housing renovation, but more generally putting in place social-ecological taxation of income and wealth, so that we are using social-ecological resources to finance social-ecological policies. So this is our take on the Social and Green Deal. So I very much look forward to hearing from other participants. Again, thank you so much, Philippe, for not only organizing the May conference, but also organizing this event. And thank you, François and Léa, for the great partnership into thinking about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eloi. You're 15 seconds late, which is perfect. Now, we are going to have three discussions, and the first is Jude Curtin-Darling. I got to know you in my first term. You were a trade unionist. In my second term, you were a colleague, member of the European Parliament. You, again, a trade unionist.
I was always a trade
unionist. What's next? Yeah, well, what's next? Are you coming back to the Parliament? No, the Brits are no longer part of the European Union. That's a shame. That's a shame. Anyway, Jude, what's your take on this? And then we will move through the panel.
Thanks very much, Philippe. There was a little bit of sarcasm there, so I'm not sure how to take that.
No,
but
absolutely not.
So bringing a trade union perspective to this, it's extremely important to recognise what a precarious and critical juncture we're at in Europe, and this whole question of fiscal policy is really actually at the centre of it. The return to austerity, or a repeat of the mistakes of 2010, will really jeopardise not just the degrowth, the momentum of the Beyond Growth conference, or some of the progressive steps which have been made in the last 5 years, but actually fundamentally is corrosive to the whole of the European project. And I think that we have to realise the ampler of the situation that we're in today. It's very important, and as Eloi has laid out, to avoid falling into the narrative that is set out that all Europeans are concerned about these identity politics questions, that there's a momentum, a backlash against environmental policy, or that there is a popular kind of move against the Green Deal. we don't see that in the trade union movement. And I speak as somebody who is on the shop floor in industrial workplaces across Europe. But what I do see is that our members are extremely anxious about their future. And that anxiety is because they know where we have to get to, but we are lacking all of the tools and all of the finance and investment which is needed to get us to where we have to get to. And the anxiety is therefore that all of the responsibility and the burden and the cost will fall on working people yet again. So actually this anxiety is the corrosive part of this debate at European level. And that's why it's absolutely crucial that a way forward is about building a sense of security and about building a sense of prosperity in the future. For us, it's about building an argument that there are good jobs tomorrow, that the way forward is not the next generation. Your children will be poorer, worse off, and more impoverished than their grandparents were, but actually the transition brings with it gains. And we have to make that narrative, and we have to make it very quickly and in an extremely complicated situation. And we have been saying now for years that the Achilles heel of the Green Deal is the lack of a social dimension. The social dimension was tacked on in a number of articles here or there in different pieces of legislation. The Social Climate Fund is completely inadequate and also reiterates the lack of equity in the whole system in relation to the most vulnerable in society. So the Green Deal has to be rebalanced if we're to make a step forward. And the other side of it is that by not addressing the social dimension, we're actually increasing the vulnerabilities of the European economy. If you look at the lack of attention to the social dimension, on the one hand, the lack of worker participation at every stage in the development of plans, industrial plans, in terms of stronger co-determination rights, a new approach to corporate governance alongside the Green Deal, then you have a disengagement, a sense that things are being imposed on people and that people don't have a stake in the movement forwards. So worker participation is one crucial part of this agenda. And the other dimension is just transition. And just transition is a big nebulous term. It's a trade union term from the beginning. Fundamentally, it's about anticipating and managing change. And part of that is about skills, but skills isn't the only part of the story. But skills is the symptom of the crisis of a lack of social dimension. Because what we see in many of the industries which are transforming is that one of the bottlenecks that they hit is a lack of skilled labour to be able to really take forward. You look at the renewables sector. What are the solar industry crying about? What are the wind sector crying about? What are other sectors in transformation crying about? It's a lack of skilled labour. That's a lack of planning, and it's a lack of attention to the social dimension. So we're in this situation where we really feel that we're at a crossroads. If the European Council and the European Parliament repeat the mistakes of the past and implement return to suicidal fiscal rules, this is just feeding the seedbed of the narrative of the far right. This feeds the sense that Europe is not dealing with actually the concerns of working people in every corner of Europe. And it also feeds, and it will feed, massive fragmentation of the single market, because it means that those with deep pockets, and there are fewer and fewer with deep pockets thanks to the German Constitutional Court, those with deep pockets will be able to lift themselves up, and many will fall behind. So we will see a massive fragmentation, a large increase in social lack of cohesion. I wanted just to say what we would like to see as part of this blueprint, which I missed a little bit from what was presented. And that's that I think we have to speak confidently about a rights-based approach at European level. We have to talk about the new rights which are needed in the context of the transition. The right to energy, the right to sustainable mobility, the right to training and employment security, the right to freedom of association, collective bargaining and worker participation, the right to just transition. If we don't have a rights-based approach in this embedding of the social deal, then the danger is that it will all be washed away further down the line. And we also then lose the link with the European level. The European level can accord those rights, which can be implemented according to the competences at national level, at European level in different policy areas. We can be far, far more ambitious about the framework that we need. Last point. In the trade union movement, the debate about sufficiency has been really pushed forward by the fantastic, I know he's here, Philippe is somewhere in the room, fantastic work of the European Trade Union Institute, who have really put in a lot of effort to try and bring in thinking into the trade union movement. But on the shop floor, we have a long way to go. And we have to have a full democratic participatory debate within the trade union movement to ensure that positions taken by unions at the top level actually are held by shop stewards and members on the ground, because that's how you affect change. When the membership on the ground are out in the street calling for the changes to happen, that's when you really impact change. So for us, we've launched as a counter to this completely I mean, I thought the British were good at self-sabotage, but really, you know, you're holding our beer. You are taking it to the new level in terms of the suggested economic governance rules which are on the table. What we need is a positive alternative agenda, and for us that's a good jobs agenda. If we put good jobs at the centre of our policy compass, and when we talk about good jobs we're talking about secure, well-paid, sustainable jobs, then you actually bring, we like 3 things, we can add 4, it's okay. But you actually bring people, you give people a stake and you make the change part of what's happening to them in their community, in their workplace and where they want to go. So we need to have a route forward. We need this blueprint, that's absolutely clear. And we're committed to working together with all those who are engaged in that. But we need to ensure that we recognise this deep anxiety, and we don't feed that anxiety by. It's very difficult, but anything which gives people a sense of deindustrialisation, job losses, the cost, increasing the cost on ordinary people will increase the anxiety that our members face, and that will really fuel the backlash which we're trying to avoid. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. I suggest we carry on with the other 3 discussions, because Éloi has to leave at 15:15, and I want to give him a chance to react to the reactions. So, Laura de Bonfils, so you are SecGen of the social platform. So I think the name says it all. I give you the floor.
So thank you so much for inviting me. So I represent, as said, Social Platform. We're the biggest civil society network in Europe, representing social NGOs that work to advance social justice. So we represent the other side as well of Europe. There's also the people that are not in work, and all like Europe in its diversity. So that's, thank you so much for the presentation. And also like for this suggestion to use as well a social-ecological matrix to go on in our EU policies. Like what is important as well, you were saying like the lack of participation that has been of workers in the development, the current Green Deal, but also the lack of engagement of civil society and citizen on the current Green Deal. And the result is also we've seen a lot of like the lack of the social dimension. So where do we start now? We start trying to implement and socializing what is there. And we don't want to like feed into the narrative of the anti-Green Deal and all of this but still we can't be complacent in saying what is there on the table is social, because the majority of those policies that are there are actually don't have a social aspect. There hasn't been social impact assessment on the policies, and they will bring very dire implication for a lot of people that have to decide either to heat their houses or to put food on their table, or to buy food, or to go to work, go to the doctor, pay for services that are actually will have. I will move into that as like what also the transition will means for social services, and so we don't want to stop that, but also. They're not talking about the social aspect. Addressing the social aspect is fueling that discussion. It's actually pushing back, because that's only, we find that as an excuse. Like we point the fingers toward the transition. Now the transition has to happen. As Eloi said, it's the cost of non-action is actually too high, because we are seeing the social consequences as well of what it means not transitioning. And so first of all, we need to start from trying to include the social dimension of what is already there, and on the implementation of the current Green Deal, but then moving to like looking at forward on the second Green Deal, the second cycle of the Green Deal, making sure that it actually is a real social Green Deal and is aligned with social justice, has a rights-based approach. And it has to embed the social dimension, and has to put the social dimension in the framework in any initiative from the beginning, putting like social in front and center rather than at the end as it happened currently, in like here and there in certain article or in certain like very small provisions. So we would like, as I said, we would like to see an impact, like a social impact assessment on every policies that is put in place, but as well, like trying to look at what is actually the real implication for people that will have to make these decisions. So then, as I said, I wanted to look at what is the impact for example, social service. Part of our constituencies, like the people that we represent, are not-for-profit social service providers. They are part of the people that will have to transition, but as well, it's part of the big picture. What is needed is like good transition. We need to create decent jobs, quality jobs, but as well, we need to strengthen the access to social services, the access to essential services as well, and strengthening as well the access to better welfare state, because there will be people that will lose their job and they have to fall into some safety nets, because we can't leave the people alone, because that would also fuel going back to more extremist views that are pushing back on some changes that have to be done in the society. So yes, as I said, the social services are, in particular the one that the non-for-profit one, have to transition, but I don't have the mean that in some of the provisions they are not seen into the big picture, so it's necessary to include them there. They also need to change the building, refit the buildings, adequate the float that they're using for their transporting people to their services or delivering the services. So that's something that we would like to also bring it into the discussion. And as well, looking at the different measures that are there, we would like to say, to see the social services that are also currently they're facing, they're now faced with delivering on their social missions and being asked to take part in the green transition. But as well, they're lacking funding and access to the resources. So include them into this narrative. So as I said, let's look forward, and we need to keep. I agree. It's very important to keep pushing back onto and take part to the economic governance review discussions, because we need the money that are necessary to be invested in the green transition, but as well the social transition, and making sure that we'll not have to make cuts and decide if we invest in our social infrastructure or we actually refitting the buildings that we need to do, or whatever needs us to be measure has to be put in place for the transition. So it's the fight that we're doing currently. So it's very urgent, and we can't go back to what it was before, but also what is on the table now. It's something that we need to stop, and we can't go back to austerity. So we are like side to side with the unions and the others, trying to ask I can put a break on these measures, because they will impact the ability that Europe has to respond to the current crisis. And then we need to reiterate that the need of a social and Green Deal, and that the Green Deal can only be a climate issue, and we've seen this, and we can't keep ignoring the social consequences, because we will walk into a crisis if we do that. Okay, so yeah, like just looking at the current elections, for example, in the Netherlands, people are asking for responses also on the social dimension. So all of that is a bit of like we need to break the narrative. So just skip. Yeah, just to respond finally, a final point on the proposals that were made in the speech. It was, for example, what was missing, if I have to make a critique, is the engagement of civil society. Because yes, trade unions have to be there, but also civil society, because we do represent a big part of society, and we can contribute to develop policies that take into consideration the needs of people, and making sure that Marie of each country of Europe doesn't have to decide if to heat their house or to put food on her table. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Laura. And indeed, we tend to forget those who are not officially represented. And actually, there's a lot of people who feel completely disenfranchised, because even workers, when we see the difficulty also for trade unions to really convince workers of their legitimacy, and that, well, collective action really delivers results. We see that there's ways to go. Finally, Marie Cudon, you teach at the Solvay Business Schools, one of those temples where the orthodox economic views are taught. I know that you're not one of those ones. But it's still a place where, well, that produces the elites that then populate the finance ministries, the central banks, the European Commission. Tell us.
What an introduction. Thank you, Philippe. So the last time I was here, in fact, it's also because of you. Maybe you remember it was more than 5 years ago. There was just a few weeks after Kate Raworth published a book on donut economy. And you were probably the first one to invite her also before you had all the big movement around the donut economy, and we had this discussion. So thanks again for inviting me, even if I'm in a business school. Just one word, because Éloi referred to the Belgian work, so I will only talk on my behalf and not on the work on behalf of the High Committee, but just to thank, because Éloi was part of the committee and he really helped us tremendously in this work. So thank you, Éloi. I guess he's still listening to us. And in fact, this notion of this idea of a sort of social ecological state is both a very simple one, but also literally a relatively radical one. It's both a simple one because just combining these two looks obvious, isn't it? I mean, we've heard it a few times, but it's also radical because if you take it literally, if we really have to focus on measures, on funding that combine both social and environmental policies, this takes us to something which is very far from where we are today. And this is basically the direction I believe we need to take. But this is not so obvious because we have been fed really with incoherences, We have been fed with the twin transition, At the same time, we're going to have the ecological transition and the digital transition, isn't it? We have been fed with the resilience and recovery facilities, with social programs, with environmental programs, with digital programs, and so on. So there's really like a lack of link and coherence between these different policies. And this is basically something that we need to do to move to the social ecological state also. And this is complicated because of what Philippe explained, basically, because of basically the way mainstream economics work, which is one measure for one target. There is one objective per measure. And what we aim at is basically a system where you have a social ecological state where you combine different dimensions. And this is something which is relatively radical in itself, but which is definitely needed also. And as we have heard, this is not something easy. It's not something easy because we should not, I think, underestimate the challenge of basically combining, anchoring the Green Deal within the tradition of the social rights. I wrote it before. Basically, the former speakers basically talked. And this is something which, once again, looks extremely obvious, you know. Of course, we will combine the two. But when we think about the narrative, the theoretical frameworks, I'm an academic, and basically the social struggles of the last decade, there is a lack of effort to combine the two. The narrative of the green transition, the narrative on the Green Deal is definitely not sufficiently anchored in the social rights transition, I believe. And this is really something which is needed, I guess, to move on in the future for that. And my last point, which will be a bit longer, my last point is basically talking about what is to me a little bit, even after 1 year and a half of work of the High Committee on Just Transition, kind of the elephant in the room, which is basically what would be the social ecological state economic system. Which economic system can we have to reach the objective of the social ecological state? Once again, you could say it's relatively obvious, but it's not at all, sadly, when we see where we are now. Definitely, we could say, okay, the economic systems must be structured around grassroots organization, around organizations such as the social economy. In the French-speaking community, as you hear, I'm a French speaker, of Belgium, the social economy world is 12% of jobs, 12%. It's both something, but it's obviously a minority. You don't need to study a lot of mathematics for that. And definitely we need to build on that. But mainly, more than building on that, it suggests, it requires that we move away from all the toxic innovation that are basically part of all the companies. And how can you combine the two? This is obviously something complicated, isn't it? And basically we need to think about what would be this beyond GDP organization. Because most of the work, at least in the economic system, is at macroeconomic level, I think. About thinking about beyond GDP with macro indicators, talking about the possibility or impossibility of decoupling and so on and so on. But working at organizational level, at the macroeconomic level, is probably still one key challenge, I guess, to reach basically what is required for a social ecological state also. And that will suggest basically to transform organizations, and including, of course, many mainstream organizations, to transform the very nice value statements. I mean, we know that there are many consultants' pets just to write very nice value statements for companies, into very radical and practical and coherent, let's say, practices. And to confront with this incoherence between what you read currently in many of these companies with the value statements that are there, and basically what are the current state of affairs in terms of the practice, and the link between this practice of adequacy, or basically the standard of this practice, with what we see as climate experts, or what we see basically where we need to go into companies. And this is extremely radical also, in the sense that there's a lot of incoherence there, and definitely we need to confront companies with that also. And last but not least, it's not because you invite me, Philippe, that I will not talk about politicians. I think we need to confront politicians also. I mean, we have elections in a few weeks or months now, and definitely being someone working on impact or sustainable finance, I think we need to confront also politicians with these basically objectives of funding, and how we will be able to fund the ecological transition, while at the same time not only maintaining the social state, maintaining a social state, a welfare state, but also progressing and advancing basically a social agenda and reducing inequality. And currently, there is a lack of basically adequate funding plan And we talk about a few percentage of GDP. I know we don't talk about GDP, but that is a lot of money, isn't it? And for both state of affairs. And as long, I believe, as there is no adequate plan for that, there's going to be a lot of anxiety, not only of us, but definitely of citizens also. So we need to have more plans. We need to confront politicians, I believe, with that. How will you be able to pay with that? This is going to be costly. We know it's going to be costly. Probably most of us in the room know that it's basically theoretically kind of a wrong of impossible calculation. You know it's a systemic issue. So how can we get to figures that make sense? Obviously, it will never make sense. But we need to have a plan, which is probably the paradox, isn't it? This is something systemic, so it's very difficult, if not impossible, to have a concrete figure about how much it's going to cost. But at the same time, we need to confront politicians with the fact that it's going to be costly and that currently there is no plan, or at least no credible plan or not sufficient plan. Voilà.
Thank you, Marek. So be my guest. Be my guest if you want to confront politicians. That's what. Well, I'm one, but I do that for a living, and I find that the political world is, in my view, probably one of the most conservative bodies. I see more openness to move outside of the political bubble than I see inside. Well, there's lots of work. Agatha, I would like you to react before we give again the floor to Eloi. If you want to do this from here, you're welcome. Huh? I don't want to give the impression that there's a hierarchy in speakers here. So, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Great to see you, and I'm very excited to also be here. I still feel the energy of the Beyond Group conference. Thank you so much for the presentation, also for the interventions from your sides. I mean, really for Eloi, I know he's still there. Really for highlighting that it's not just about policies, but it's also about that deep restructuring to go towards the post-growth institutions. And I think that's something that it really requires more attention, more reflection on how we can actually make it happen. And I also loved what you said about that call for us not to weaponize the climate emergency against the social crises. I think that's a very powerful message that we need to be more aware of, particularly also in the context of that non-transition, the cost of non-transition. And Judith as well for speaking about the importance of the right-based approach and the dangers of not embedding those rights in the new Green and Social Deal, but also what you said about building that sense of security at the center of the transition. I think we are in a spot where people are concerned, where people are worried, where there's a lot of danger of not placing that security and that sense of security at the center. Laura, I wanted to thank you also for bringing us closer really to the importance of including people in shaping those narratives. I think we often forget, being in the EU bubble and tending to forget that we are a really big bubble, that it is the people really that should be at the center of shaping those narratives, and particularly also the engagement of civil society. You spoke about the importance of civil society, and indeed, I think we've seen massive mobilization from civil society as well regarding those topics. And Marek also for talking about embedding that green transition into the social rights movement. So finding a way that we can bring the two together, and your great reflections on the economic system that we really need at the center of that. I wanted to ask you all, I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about the social and environmental transition, I think it's about people. It's about people's survival, it's about people's dignity, it's about people's well-being. And you all touched upon what Eloi mentioned at the beginning, the cost of non-transition. And I would love to hear from you on how can we effectively communicate about that cost of non-transition to mobilize action, not to create more polarization and more division that we're seeing spreading all over Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Agatha. That was concise and powerful. So, Eloi, back to you. Before you leave, I'd like you maybe to react to what our four discussants have mentioned, and then I will give again the floor to the first three who were questioned by Agatha, and then we go back to the room. Eloi.
Well, thank you, Philippe. There was some concern about my presence. I was there all the time. All right, so I've heard everything, and I've had. I thank you very much for your discussions and comments and criticisms, and I'm going to try to answer to all of them. The first, maybe general comment is on the notion that we need to fight the last war before starting the new one, and the last war is between Keynesianism and neoliberal policies. That is, that apparently the book written by John Maynard Keynes in 1936, The General Theory, has not reached European officials yet, and so we are still in the moment when we are pondering if we are going to create public, austerity, adding to let's say, private recession. So that was the critical mistake that was made, the critical mistake that Keynes really identified in the general theory, that the state should do counter-cyclical policies, and if you are already in a recession, fiscal austerity is the worst idea that you can have. And of course, there you see a tension between the logic of beyond growth and going back to Keynes, of course, because it would really be far-fetched to say that Keynes was beyond growth. Okay, so the question is austerity, is growth the answer to austerity, and just going back to Keynes? And then you need to think about the Maastricht paradigm, in which we are very much still in, which is that austerity and growth are actually two faces of the same coin. I know it's a bit difficult to understand, but when the Maastricht system was written, it was written with very precise figures about economic growth, public deficit and public debt, and inflation. And all those figures actually are consistently fitting together. And so I would argue that, on the contrary, beyond growth is precisely, and what I mentioned about sufficiency, is precisely going both beyond the logic of growth and the logic of austerity. Okay, that was the first comment, because I think it was at least mentioned by Judith. Then to go to Judith's points, very important points, and thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. I would like to mention that Tony Mazzocchi, 30 years ago exactly, was the first to write about the just transition, a trade unionist in the US, arguing about the need to connect trade unions' concerns with jobs and income and pensions with the environmental crisis. And so I think there is a matrix here, which is the matrix of trade unions thinking about the just transitions for the last 30 years. And then when she mentioned the need to have a rights-based approach, I fully agree. And Yamina Saeb's work on energy equity has really touched upon using the European Pillar for Social Rights and the Principle 20, where essential services are being defined according to energy needs, which is also the approach that you will find in the report from the High Council of Just Transition. And so we absolutely have this idea that we need to have a rights-based approach, and really putting forward this Principle 20 of the European Pillar for Social Rights, and this notion of essential services, and extending that not just to fuel poverty, but again to food insecurity. And this is what really we mean by essential services in the table. I know it was really written in small letters, but we have that right in the middle of our policy brief. To go to Laura's point, well, I fully agree with the fact that we don't take into account civil society as much as we should, but what I mentioned is the need to create a new institution, which would be a EU Citizens Forum, which would be permanent. So how's that for, taking into account civil society at the heart of EU institutions? That was the first proposal that I actually put forth, was to say we need this new institution. And when Philippe says, how could we know what people are really discussing, around the kitchen table in the EU? Well, what about having the people I mentioned, in real life and fully fledged around the table, in Brussels, discussing that and making proposal on how to change their lives, that would be certainly for me a progress. Marek, thank you very much for your kind words, and I return the favor to you because you were brilliant in directing this group. You are absolutely right in talking about inconsistencies. And when you mentioned the twin transitions of digital and ecological transition, I think there is no greater inconsistency than this one right now at the heart of, narrative in the EU, which is that the two most important transitions are, on the one hand, the digital transition, on the other hand, the ecological transition, and we need to conduct both, together, and everything will be well. Just to remind you, we are consuming right now 3 times as much natural resources than we did in 1970, and we are supposed to live in dematerialized economic systems which have been dematerialized, supposedly, allegedly, by the digital transition. In other words, each digital innovation came with a greater consumption of natural resources and energy. So we need to really think hard about the fact that those two transitions are actually more enemies, more foes than they are friends, and think about this, because this is going to become very quickly a big problem. You are also right about the need to have economic models, new economic models, Marek, at the heart of this. So the well-being economy. My take on this is that we need to move from full work to full health, and to go back to the case that was made by Judith on creating good quality jobs. I think we need to extend this to the question of health. I think health is becoming really quickly the key argument in environmental policy. And you see that at COP28, you see that with the first day in December, on December 3rd, that was devoted in COPs to the question of health. You see that with the letters from the global health communities on why we need to do climate policies. And so I think, that work is part of the answer, but health is a critical aspect. And I think if you are thinking about economic models and value creation, I think that, the Adam Smith model, whereby you have a division of labor and then productivity and then economic growth, and to start with the question of health and how health can encompass actually different aspects of human lives and key dimensions of well-being, I think is a very important point. And then, Agatha, thank you very much for your question, which I'm not going to answer because you asked them to the panel. But thank you so much for reminding us that we need to have the youth heard in this conversation. And when I mentioned the need to have this EU panel, there's also needs to be intergenerational debate in the Europe more than what we are having now. So thank you all very much for your comments. We will integrate those in the final version of the paper, and I hope to have even more substantial written comments from you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Eloi, if you can just stay for one more minute. Actually, I found it remarkable that you mentioned the citizens' panels, because to me, it's one of the hidden jewels of this Commission. Around the Conference of the Future of Europe, there's been a determined effort to establish citizen panels, and experience has been built. This is not something that, well, there have been prototypes, and now they've been rolled out, and it's a totally underutilized instrument. So I think that actually that might be, in your paper, one of the low-hanging fruits that could be put to work actually much earlier than some may think. So I take that as an action point for work around June 2024 to make that happen.
I agree.
Now, I will give
you,
the opportunity to the three first discussants to respond to Agatha, and then we move to the floor. We started late, but my sense is that I'd like to finish at 9. For those who want, there will be drinks to continue the informal discussions. But I think that, well, you know, it's winter. We are all tired a bit, so let's try to finish at 9. But so first, in the same order, Judith first.
Very quickly, how do we make the case of the cost of inaction? I think it's also about the last slide that was put up about building the pathways. That's a key part of making the case. I think that actually within the trade union movement, it's widely, the conclusions of the Stern report already a long time ago show that the longer that we wait, the higher the cost of action. That is well established. The question is, how do we get moving? And I think there, the process, having the process, the finances, the participation, this is really the critical point. I just want to, I'm going to abuse, if I may, for 1 second, because Marek said something really interesting that I just want to flag up because I see somebody in the room who I want people to know is in the room. He might not want me to say that he's in the room, but never mind. So Marek, you were talking about the need for a radical transformation of organisations. This is absolutely what we're also working on. This is when I talked about a radical change of corporate governance. This is part of it. And just a few weeks ago, in DG Research, there was an innovative project or initiative launched, a community of practice on Industry 5.0. Industry 5.0 being a different approach in technology and industrial policy, bringing together sustainability, resilience, and human-centered approaches, and looking at it also from the level of companies and practices in companies and organizations. So this is one area where actually there are, what we see as trade unions is that sometimes the lack of the coherence is also that there are different people talking about similar things in different places with different combinations of stakeholders. And one of the great things about the conference was bringing lots of that together. And I think that we need to avoid that we then fragment off again with a kind of silo debate on some of these things, because there are some very deep red beating hearts in different parts of the Commission.
So yes, so thank you, Agatha, for the question. So how do we counter the narrative of how do we build the narrative for the cost of the non-action for the non-transition? It's also using hard evidence of what is already happening in the planet, like using the raising temperature, fires, and all of the floods and other things. It's pretty clear that there is a need to respond to the crisis, also the resources that we are overusing of our planet. So it's something that it's there, and the evidence is pretty clear. And then as well, I agree with Jude, like the process of including and the participation. And on this, I take the occasion to just answer on what I meant on, like, we're not against, of course, citizens panels or citizens institutions, but that's one part. But there is also,
it's not a substitute.
Yeah, it's not a substitute of what is lacking. That is the civil dialogue. That's so. Is it the other part that needs to be added? And we're not like that's. Of course, let's push for more citizen engagement through panels and discussion and consultation, but as well, where a lot of the democratic deficit at the moment in the way that we do policies is civil dialogue, that it's done ad hoc, it's not done in a concrete way in all parts of policy making. So that was more like coming as well from representing, because it's organized civil society that can bring the voices and the experience and the lived experience of the different people, and also support with data or bring in those stories as well. So yeah, that would be more like my response. Yeah.
Thank you, Marek.
Thank you.
Rapidly, since I know we need to stop at 9. So just three short point. The first one is indeed narrative is probably the word that I've heard most in Brussels the last months. So many people working on narratives and new narratives to counter the existing one. Probably when all these narratives will be there, the most important is probably just to disseminate, like the conservatives did in the US or in Europe, to disseminate so much of this narrative that they've become mainstream. And I think I really like Eloa's approach also of building narrative around concrete people, basically concrete cases, the real life of people. I think it's important. Second point, which may be a little bit my narrative on the economic system, is basically just to say that what's going on is a bit foolish. I mean, from a very rational perspective, when you see big companies having so much share buybacks, buying their own shares, for instance, so much money, and we talk about billions of euros being basically bought for shareholders. I mean, and we don't need to be so radical just to witness that also. Rather than investing this money basically to cope with basically the challenges, or to develop some tools to manage basically CSRD, the new regulation, fighting this regulation basically to have probably more buybacks or more that. And buybacks have been multiplied by 5, I think, in a few years. I mean, it's impressive to see how much it has been. And so there is something which is just not rational. It's not in the interest of companies to have these policies. And basically, I think this could be at least one type of the narrative. I'm trying to develop this narrative in these days, as you see. So I think it's really something that that could help also to show basically the fight between short-termism versus probably long-termism. And the third point will be a bit of advertisement, nice advertisement also. Since next week, we're going to organize at ULB, a few kilometers from here, in the Solbosch campus, a conference on basically what is a model organization to ECO. And the two speakers will be first Estelle Keuleman, so it's going to be in French, who is a trade unionist, probably you know Estelle. And the second one will be Timothée Duverger, who is probably the best French professor in social economy. And they will, both of them, talk about basically what is what type of organization do we need basically for the transition and to cope with these challenges. So it's going to be next Wednesday at 6 p.m. at ULB.
Thank you.
For free.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the floor. So you may, or should I say, the goal is really to collect as much collective wisdom on to enrich the work. Excuse me, that Yamina, Julia, Eloi and my team have done. So it doesn't need to be a question to the panelists. It can be just an expression of, well, a contribution to that work. It can be a question or a debate. Feel free. But voila, so it's we have half an hour. We will have a few communications at the end. But so who wants to take the floor? Yes, at the back. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Pablo Sanchez. I work for the European Federation of Public Services Unions, so a trade union. 2 points. One is on the issue of like the narrative, which I'm not going to repeat, but I think if there is one lesson out of the pandemic, and I think we should still remember what happened and how it happened, is that public policy was totally, it's like there were politicians, as we mentioning, moving and giving orders, but there was no one behind. There was no capacity. This has been because as our society has been privatized. So you'll imagine that working for a public sector trade union, I will defend that things go back into public ownership. But there is no beating about the bush. Unless, if we are looking at an alternative economic model of the one we have, we need to demarketize very many things in society. Because otherwise, the growth stroke for profit logic will continue its own dynamic. If we continue to have kindergartens in a for-profit logic, and elderly care in a for-profit logic, and schools in a for-profit logic, and pharmaceutical industry in a for-profit logic, we're going to have issues to actually find the proper medicines. So I think it's a very strong element in the beyond growth debate, is that we need to take big chunks of our society and our economy out of the market in many ways, the social economy, cooperatives, nationalization, remunicipalization, civic, social, public civic partnerships. I mean, I could spend the next 25 minutes giving examples, but the idea is that we need to come from this, there is no alternative and at the economic field. The second one was on the Future of Europe conference. We participated strongly, and that was done immediately after the pandemic also. The problem with that is that big institutions at the European level, such as the Commission, they would take the conclusions and do whatever they want. The problem with these fora, and I'll put a very 20 seconds example. We participated in almost every single one panel on health after the pandemic in the Future of Europe conference. 99.9% of the comments of people were, we need public health at good quality for all, and so on and so forth. We want a universal, free, public, blah, 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 blah. What the Commission did immediately after, proposed the European Health Data Space, which was the recommendation number 1 proposed by the Commission, the first point in their own proposals, which no one else in the room was understanding what it was, and the European Health Data Space, which is using an internal market mechanism in the health system, is voted next week in the European Parliament. Every other proposal about more staff, more nurses, better nurses, give them time, give them means to work, all this, down the pan, European Health Data Space is voted before the end of the mandate. And that's the problem with this type of proposals, that sometimes if you just give 20, they take the 21st, that was only roughly discussed, and that is the one that they push. So we have to be a little bit careful with this. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was more an intervention, and it's all fine. I see all men raising hands, women. Voilà. Here we are. Just in, voilà. So you start. Yeah, it's always the same.
Oh, thank you so much. I really reacted to your request for more for women asking. I would like to talk about companies and entrepreneurs. Linda van Goor, I'm an independent advisor. I have my own firm. I'm next to Melanie Riebeck, who has also her own firm. We are entrepreneurs. We need businesses in the economy to add value, to make money flow, to pay salaries, create added value. We are entrepreneurs that care for people, for the people that we work with. We don't extract profit from business models, but we put profit back into the ecosystem of everything that we make our business with. I have the feeling in the panel and in what has been said until now that it's sort of assumed that companies are organized in a certain way. I hear about this different organization. What did you say? I really would like to hear more about, so I'll come after. We need to talk about ownership, because we see, for example, in Germany, there's masses of people who retire and who would like to sell their firm to either children or to someone else, but who cannot. And they would like to have a different kind of ownership structure that protects their purpose, their origin story, from those who extract the dividends out, who, buy back the shares and take out for individual benefit. Can we please add ownership as a core element to make good jobs, to make safe jobs, to make sustainable jobs, to add value, as in health, and not just in terms of dividends? Can we add ownership to the agenda? Yes. Thank you.
Point taken. Next, I'd seen hands. I will alternate men and women. So, you're next. Yeah, you.
Thank you to all the speakers. Sebastiano Sabato, senior researcher at the European Social Observatory in Brussels. I have just a consideration and a question. The consideration is that I agree with what Éloi Laurent said, to start from what already exists, that is the European Green Deal, and I agree on the need to link this to a rights-based social rights approach, and I agree that the social dimension of the Green Deal is a bit narrow but not inexistent, because the European Green Deal actually in a bit vague way refers to the European Pillar of Social Rights as the reference framework to make sure that no one is left behind in the transition. This is the catchphrase. And actually, I was a bit surprised that the pillar was mentioned, I think, now only once in the reply by Eloi Laurent to the comments. But I think that in order to go ahead with the socio-ecological agenda, we should start from the European Green Deal and from the European Pillar of Social Rights and find better ways to link those. We should reflect how much these social ecological policies that Eloi Laurent presented are in line with the pillar, and if at what extent it is possible to implement those policies through the pillar. Also because the pillar has also the advantage that to some extent is already linked to EU socio-economic governance, to the European semester. And so the last point is actually when we talk about the pillar and these social ecological policies, it's not only about the principle 20, about access to essential services. It's the whole pillar, social protection, social inclusion, and so on. So my question is actually how we can, there are some options that say, some opinions that say, no, the pillar doesn't fit the socio-ecological transition. It's not fit for a beyond the growth perspective. We need something completely new. I don't agree with that position. The point for me is how to make sure that that the pillar and its implementation will be related and linked better to the implementation of a new generation of social ecological policies. And here I would like to know the opinions. I'm pretty sure that the report will also address this key, I would say, point.
Thank you. I will carry on taking interventions from the floor. I will give 2 minutes each to the 3 discussants before I give the conclusion to Agatha. So I suggest that I stop taking interventions at 10:02, so that indeed we can conclude properly. So there were, voilà, you have the floor.
Thank you, Winne van Woer from Oxfam. So I missed the global justice aspect a bit in this discussion, actually. Surely when we talk about centering the social justice dimension of the Green Deal, we shouldn't forget that the current Green Deal happens at the back of cheapened labor and resources in the majority world. So my question, I'll be very short, is predominantly directed to Judith to hear her reflections on aligning with southern movements with their struggles as trade unions here in the West. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, what?
Thank you. Matthew Bach from ICLE Europe, a network of local and regional governments. I think it's great that you emphasize, all the speakers emphasize the concerns and the amount of anxiety and fear that citizens are having. And we've heard about the role that trade unions play, civil society play, and so on. But I think what we really have to emphasize also here is that the local level is crucial here and is not integrated into our governance structures fully in terms of how we really manage this actual transition, the social and the ecological one. And so I think there should be more attention also to how then we can truly integrate the local level into this work. And I think this would actually help to accelerate it and circumvent some of these blockages that we're currently experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you. You have the floor.
Thanks. Doreen Fedrigo from Climate Action Network Europe. I think it's great listening to tonight. I think it's great bringing us together again during this time. One of the things that I'm thinking, which is really important, is what Naomi Klein talks about, the network of networks, that whole kind of intersectionality, bringing people together across different movements so that we can have louder voices. That doesn't mean that we will all sign up to one manifesto. Let's not waste our time. But that we continue talking to each other, because already I can say that within CAN Europe, we're in the early stages of it, but we are looking at how to act as a climate movement in the 21st century, let's say, which is going beyond the greenhouse gas emissions and looking at materials, looking at sufficiency, talking about equality, solidarity, decolonization to a certain extent. We'll get there at some point. A lot of the issues that are being talked about today, okay? So just putting a flag up there, we're doing this, so please come and talk to us. But one of the things that I think is really important, and this comes from a workshop done recently with us through a body called MindWorks, which is social behavior, social science unit within Greenpeace International. Okay, and they do a lot of work with other organizations as well. They see fatigue. There's no point in saying to people, the fires are getting worse, this is getting worse. People are exhausted and they are struggling. And I'm not disagreeing with you, but all I mean is people are exhausted. They are struggling to feed themselves. They're choosing to feed themselves and their children and heat their homes. And this is the disconnection between the people who are in positions of influence, so it's not just the people who are taking the decisions, but it's the people who are lobbying for those decisions. There's a complete disconnection, okay? So what I think we really need to do is come with a narrative that says the world that we want, where people don't need to make those choices, where our health systems, our education systems, which have been in austerity since 2007, 2008, it has not come out and it's getting worse. Those kinds of things. That's what people want to hear. We can give them the proof afterwards. And in addition to all of the ecological disasters, we can talk about the greater inequalities now since the 1920s. We can talk about the number of multi-billionaires, etc. Those kinds of things, in addition to the champagne glass on CO2 emissions in the world. Thank you.
Yeah, behind, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Sebastian Mang. I work for the New Economics Foundation. Just two quick points. One, the geopolitics of the current situation is also changing really rapidly, right? We have war in Ukraine, we have conflicts in the Middle East again, and China growing in influence, possible conflict with Taiwan. The response is that China and the US are investing in public services, and we're being left behind. At the same time, we've also got Global South countries demanding higher prices for raw materials, and that will likely continue. And all those things point to sufficiency being key. And I think we need to be making a geopolitical argument that sufficiency is key. And so I think that's an additional point to the debate today. Secondly, that the macroeconomics is also changing. I think we're going to lose fiscal rules, like you said, Philippe, unfortunately. Well, at least the situation is not very good. And so we need to start, and I think green spending gaps are going to become more and more clear as we move on into the next few years. And so we need to start thinking about different ways. So one is obviously taxation, and another one is stronger monetary fiscal coordination. One of the things we've seen is during crisis, we are able to do monetary fiscal coordination. Some of the things happened during COVID was monetary fiscal coordination. And now moving out of crisis, we're doing the opposite. We've got high interest rates, but we've got high fiscal spending, which is obviously very expensive because of high interest rates. What we need is moving on into a situation where we have stronger monetary fiscal coordination during good times, where the central bank and governments are working together to invest in the right things, making, for example, through Eurobonds and dual interest rates, making the good things cheaper, and making the bad things, so fossil fuels and other things, more expensive. Sorry, I should say that dual interest rate should also be for social policy, not just for the green. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi. My name is Melanie. As Linda mentioned before, I'm the CEO of a tech company. I also teach at the University of Amsterdam Business School. I'm a progressive, but I want to play devil's advocate with you. I'm very alarmed by the lack of diversity on this panel. Everyone here is coming from a point of view of an extremely progressive point of view. We've got climate, we've got trade unions, we've got, all the progressive activistic things, check boxes ticked. But what we're missing here is people from the business parties, people from the Christian parties. Can we not find other angles for this stuff? Now, let me just name a couple things that might be helpful. The first thing is, of course, we all know that financial extraction is the root cause of the growth imperative, right? This, of course, requires this radical transformation of business that we already spoke about earlier. Now, it just so happens that usury, and the prohibition of usury is a great Christian value. Right? Another thing also is that if we're looking at transformative governance forms, things like steward ownership, for example, the usage of golden shares, that allows us, if we're a nation state, we can, when we cultivate these startups, by adding a golden share, we can ensure that the long-term governance of that company is that it continues to support that country that created it and invested in it in the first place. I mean, are there not some narratives that we can find that can speak a little bit more to those, maybe with a different political narrative? Because if we do not, we're just going to remain stuck here.
Excellent point indeed. Yes, you.
Yeah, thank you. Yves Marignac from Negawatt in France. We rather come from the energy and climate scenario world, but we've done a lot of work on sufficiency, and I was very pleased to hear that Éloi emphasized the role of sufficiency to think of beyond growth, and pleased also to know that Yamina Saeb, whom we work with, is very much involved. I just want to bring our experience very shortly that sufficiency is a very effective way to rethink in concrete ways, including with citizens, of reshaping the economy in the sense that creates value through protecting and sharing resources rather than destroying and predating them. But I mean, that I could say a lot of words about that. I just wanted to bring one possible issue in the narrative that I think would be important, which is the relationship that you can establish between sufficiency and freedom, which is something important, of course, because if we want to address a new economy that is appealing to people, we need to convince them that there will remain freedom of choice, or even that there will be more freedom of choice. And maybe one example to illustrate that is the understanding that we build from the yellow vest crisis in France, of course, which was seen as reluctance or even a strong opposition to a sufficiency policy, because people reacted to a tax on driving less. But we actually see it as the opposite. I mean, it's the sign that people were fed up with a policy that is completely turning its back to sufficiency, with increasing distances to cover and increasing dependency on car, and actually a loss of freedom when you get so dependent. So sufficiency in the sense of creating alternatives and providing different choices to people can be a powerful way to turn this freedom of choice narrative positively in a beyond growth perspective.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on this liberties and freedom aspect. Nina Klein of Ecolise, which is community-led initiatives on sustainability. So eco-villages, transition network, permaculture, and also ICLE Europe. And we have published a manifesto which says people need the right to have the choice to live sustainably. Because that's what, if you're an eco-villager, you're trying really hard and you want to live sustainably. You can't do that right now because the system around you does not allow for this. And we think that giving this choice is something that people need. And also, what I miss in the narrative on the panel is looking at citizens, not at somebody who needs to be protected. and looked after, but actually seeing citizens as agents of change, because collective action in cooperatives, in energy cooperatives, actually is what made the difference already now. It's not state energy policies, but it's collective action by cooperatives. And just giving this agency to citizens is, for me, essential, and that's what's social.
Actually, I'd just like to react to that before I give back the floor to the panel. Oftentimes I get the question, how can we still hope? How can we still hope? Because indeed, if we are in the mindset of individualism driven by the neoliberal ideology, of course, me alone facing these immense challenges, I'm powerless. And I do believe that the only chance that we have is collective intelligence. And not, I don't believe in an advanced sort of avant-garde who knows better than the people what is good for the people. I don't believe in that. Absolutely not. I believe there's only the collective mobilization of intelligence and creativity that can really find a way. So I very much echo what you said. I'll go back to the panel. Sorry, I can't take everyone, but we have a cocktail waiting. I think it's downstairs. Later on, there will even be on the 3rd, so there will even be something to eat. But before that, food for thought. Judith?
Yeah, thank you very much for all of the comments. I'm not going to try and respond to everything. I would just say, in relation to the last comment and the question of agency, this is the fundamental point at the heart of our demands around just transition. Worker participation is about making workers the actors in their destiny rather than recipients of other people's decisions, whether public policy or whether corporate decisions. So for us, the question of agency and participation are exactly embedded, and obviously to be able to ensure worker participation, you need the collective rights to be able to negotiate, to withdraw your labour, and so on. And those are massively under threat across Europe at the moment. The first target of the right wing, the far right, when they're elected, is often organised labour. And that's what we're seeing in Finland. We're seeing it north, south, east, west, actually. We have trade unionists in France who are in judicial courts for strike action during the pension strikes. We have attacks on the collective bargaining system in the Scandinavian countries, in the east, in the south, all across. So this question is really fundamental, a fundamental question for us. Maybe we come at it from a slightly different angle. I wanted just to respond to 2 points. The first is in relation to the European Pillar of Social Rights. We did an evaluation with the Green Deal, a Fit for 55 exercise, where we looked at where's the hard law and where is the soft recommendations, steering. All of the hard law is on environmental standards. All of the soft is on social. And the Commission came forward, developed together with the Council, a Council recommendation on just transition, which we were very actively involved in. The first report on the implementation of that Council recommendation was published a week ago, and it shows that one country implemented the recommendations, and that's Spain, where we have national just transition agreements. So soft steering measures are not achieving the social dimension. That's why we say we need a stronger social rights-based approach within this reinforced Green Deal structure. And the second point was, and I missed it because I was long, but I tried to be shorter, is the international dimension. Obviously, when we talk about good jobs, we're not just talking about good jobs in our own marketplace and our own garden. We're talking about good jobs along global supply chains. And we work very, very actively with the international trade union movement and with trade unions in a whole variety of countries who are under extreme pressure and danger in many cases. in order to push that good jobs agenda. So, and there are big challenges, and that's something that I would alert you to. We represent manufacturing workers. The question of sufficiency poses really big and very different challenges for workers along global supply chains. In our work in the textile sector and the garments industry, the shift away from fast fashion for us means lifting up and moving up the value chain and pushing for a better, higher quality textile industry, garment industry in Europe. And we're seeing it in countries like Portugal, traditionally low-cost countries, who have done an industrial policy and used social conditionalities to completely transform their industry. On the other hand, the fast fashion transformation, move away from fast fashion, has enormous implications for garment workers elsewhere in the world. So this just transition agenda has to have an international dimension looking at global value chains. Otherwise, we will increase inequalities globally and poverty for workers who've found themselves within global value chains and don't necessarily have alternatives because of the lack of framework conditions at national level where they are. So we're very conscious that we work very carefully with our international trade union partners to try and push that forward.
Thank you, Jude. Laura.
Thank you for all of the interventions. Again, I will not try to address all of them because it's quite possible in 2 minutes. I want to just answer to Sebastiano on the pillar of social rights. We've sat in several panels together advocating for the pillar. And what I always say is like, we need to break silos among the different policies. So on the green policies, we need to include the social dimension, but as well on the pillar implementation, put the green dimension. So we have to stop looking, okay, we look at the Green Deal, we only look at all of the environmental transition, and then we deliver on, again, thank you, Jude, for pointing out all the soft measures in the pillar, for example, or on the social aspects, on the social policies. But when we do that, we're not looking at what is our environmental impact on certain policies that we put in place. So I would say first action that it should be done, it's breaking the silos of when we do policies and look at the implication, like social, environmental, but as well economic implication of certain policies. So, and put them at the same level, not the social conditionalities always come as the last in a lot of the policies that we make. Then on the different industry, attacking the industry, or I represent a social platform. Part of our membership is actually social economy actors. A lot of them are all cooperatives. So we do advocate for their rights. What we are going against is a lot of the profit that is not redistributed among people or reinvested for the well-being of people. So that's also weighing of shifting our economy, looking at including the social conditionalities, and as well on the way that our industry is where the profit goes, or how do we distribute our society. And I didn't talk about the external dimension. Also, it's just because of the constituency that we do represent a social platform. We work on internal policies, but of course, all of also the external dimension is part of the policies that we pass and the way that we decide to transition or changing our economic system. It has an impact on the external aspect of the EU. So we need to include that as well in the discussion. So I agree. Thanks.
Thank you, Marek.
So maybe just two comments, and maybe also partly addressing the two comments of our Dutch colleagues, maybe because I'm Belgian, so I. But first one, and then my comments will be in two very different directions probably. So the first one is I also agree that I think we need to build networks of networks or alliances. Definitely family businesses are frequently the type of companies that are more long-term oriented, for instance. And we face the same situation in Belgium, that many of them are taken over, or people when retire, they don't. I mean, it's the same story in Belgium. And that's probably part of a more general, basically, movement. But building alliance with family businesses, I think, is one thing, and building alliance also with insurance companies that are witnessing basically what's going on, and some of them being probably even more active on these issues and asking them to be probably more vocal, partly. That could be part of the narrative about what's going on and how it's going to affect, because they have the credential, let's say, of mainstream actors also. So that's just two examples. And then my second comment is probably related to this discussion of diversity and so on. Maybe I was the one who was supposed to be more diverse. But let's say what I witnessed in the last 12 months. I'm teaching social innovation, social entrepreneurship in a business school. So is honestly what we are witnessing, talking about share buybacks, talking about the environmental pause or break. I don't know what's the best term in English. We're going to pay during a few years, not to say a decade. And when you see this decision being made, probably that has put me more into the other corner, or at least more engaged on that. And definitely these are things that are really worrying. I mean, and that did not happen 3 or 5 years ago. And certainly the situation today is probably very different from the one during the COVID period or something like that. So, which makes me basically more probably more negative about this also. Yeah.
Thank you. In which order? Agatha, I want to give you the last word, actually. And so there would be one communication by Sergi on the Network for the Wellbeing Economy. So, yeah. So do it first. I will indicate the cocktail, and then, Agatha, you have the last word.
Okay, sorry, Agatha. This is an announcement, actually. Part of the solution of taking this forward is the feeling of a community. So for people who work in EU institutions, this is a short announcement that some of us thought that it could be useful to have such a community to exchange about, inclusive and sustainable well-being economy. So reach out if you're interested to be part of this kind of very informal community of people working in EU institutions. It would be, things like, a lunchtime chat, a breakfast meeting, very informal, with the hope of giving each other ideas, hope and inspiration to take this forward. And of course, with guests from civil society and so on. But I would say it would be something for the community of people that work in the EU in a way or the other at technical level. And this could be one of the many ways, I guess, to take this agenda forward into the next term and at the EU level. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergi. And so, after Agatha concludes, we meet on the 3rd floor for actually drinks and food offered by the Partners for a New Economy. They have been a faithful partner of the Beyond Growth Conference and of this evening, and I really want to thank them for providing us with, more real food, food for the belly, I would say, after the food for thought. Agatha, you have the last word.
Thank you very much. You've given me a very difficult task of me being between people and the food and drinks. Thank you so much for the floor. And I think a very clear message is emerging today, which is that to tackle the socio-ecological crises, we need to look beyond the siloed approaches and build that green and social deal that places human and planetary well-being at the heart. And we're here more than half a year after the Beyond Growth Conference, and we're also 6 months before the European Parliament elections. So at GC, we recognize the key role that youth will play shaping the next European Parliament and the next European Commission. As you might remember, in 2019, it was, in fact, Europe's young and first-time voters that drove that voter turnout, with youth participation rising by 50%. But young people are not just voters, they are also mobilizers on the ground, all the way from their friends to the communities around them. They are also advocates for a better system directly with decision makers. So over the past few months, we worked collaboratively as a coalition bringing together the priorities of the largest youth-led networks in Europe, all of them working on different environmental and social issues, education, governance, women's rights, climate justice, and many, many other topics. And we put forward 24 concrete proposals for 2024 for a planet-friendly, youth-inclusive, future-proof Europe, with 5 key elements building the coalition's vision. The new economic system centered on human and planetary well-being, meaningful youth participation, social justice, quality education, and full recognition of rights of future generations. So we're calling for lowering the voting age to 16 across the whole of EU, appointing an EU commissioner for future generations, who serves as a guardian of rights of future citizens across all EU policy areas, citizens who cannot just be invited and represented at the table. For a system of universal basic services where every person can rely on affordable housing, on high-quality healthcare, free and accessible education, environmental protections, and many, many others. Developing a new framework on sustainable resource use, tackling what we also talked about briefly today, EU resource overconsumption, with very specific science-based binding material footprint reduction targets, and 21 other very concrete proposals that are recognizing that it is structural social inequalities that are at the core of our economic system and the climate crisis. And we saw that the last European Parliament elections were driven by a green wave spreading all across Europe. But this time, we're facing a very different reality, where for the first time in history, a right-wing coalition in the European Parliament is possible. And that is a reality where the urgency of the planetary social crises are smashed to the ground by concerns over profit and over economic growth. It's a reality where crucial proposals would not pass in the European Parliament. The European climate law would fail, the nature restoration law would fail, and many, many others. And it's a reality where gaining enough support for progressive, social, and environmental policies is impossible. But this is not a story that works for people on the ground. It's abstract, it's intangible, and it's not relatable. And we need a European green and social deal that would recognize the realities and concerns of Antoni in Poland and Sofia in Germany and Leo in Luxembourg and Agueda in Portugal. But ahead of the European Parliament elections, many national elections still to take place in different member states, we see a very concerning trend. More and more people are shifting from supporting progressive to conservative anti-EU political parties, and more people with progressive views decide to stay at home and not vote. And in fact, young people between 18 and 24 are twice as likely not to vote compared to the other citizens. So this is a massive risk to the progress that we have made since the last elections, and also a threat to a united Europe. And the climate movement has empowered millions of people to act, building a community with a sense of hope and solidarity all around the world. But fighting to tackle the climate crisis just doesn't work when it glosses over other injustices: racism, exploitation of workers, gender-based violence, and the list goes on. Simply greening capitalism overlooks the reality that these very power systems are responsible for leading us into the socio-ecological crises that we're currently facing. And this is a fight against extreme affluence, where billionaires emit 1 million times more greenhouse gases than the average person. It's a fight against the biggest climate conference led by an oil chief who denies there is science behind the fossil fuel phase-out and uses international climate negotiations for getting oil deals. And it's a fight against poverty and inequalities driven by a post-colonial system, not being born in the wrong or unlucky place. But we are in a crisis of worry. We're speaking to people who are overwhelmed, who are scared, who are sad, who are anxious about the many crises that we're experiencing, the climate crisis, the housing crisis, the energy crisis, and many, many, many others. And I'm sure many of you have felt this way. I know I have. It's that vision of a better world that drives me, and yet there are days when it is really, really hard. And we go through this ourselves, and we're translating those feelings in the way we try to mobilize people to act. We tell them we don't have time, that it's almost too late. We show them terrifying graphs and numbers and predictions of a global collapse. But we see this over and over again. People do not change their minds when they just see numbers and data, or when they hear once again about the wave of bad news coming at them from all the different sides. People need a hopeful vision for the future, and most importantly, communities around them that support them and drive their motivation. And we need those communities more than ever, communities with a new vision of prosperity, one that is focused on meeting the fundamental needs and rights of all and providing a safe and just space in which everyone can thrive within planetary boundaries. So I hope we meet again in 6 months, not to discuss how to navigate in the new far-right dominated reality, but to celebrate that the narrative of hope and action has forged a clear path for the European Green and Social Deal. Thank you.
To get downstairs, there's stairs just next to the room. And for those who need them, there's elevators that you took, I think, coming on the way here.